video, week number 22, Evolution and Natural Selection, part 1. So we're starting our new unit, and this is all about how organisms change over the history of the Earth. Okay, we looked at what organisms were around, but how have they changed? And here's a picture of Charles Darwin, and he's a scientist who's super famous, super important in coming up with this idea of natural selection. And here are pictures of some of the birds he studied on the Galapagos Islands, and we'll talk more about those in class. All right. Again, to start you off with something kind of cool, because science rules. And here's a cool picture, close-up of a spider. So I don't know, just check that out for a few seconds and really take a look. Never get to really look at a spider that close, right? You usually want to squash it or go the other way. So pretty cool. Look at the eyes. All right. So you have your paper that I gave you for the notes, so make sure that's set up and ready to go. The title, Evolution and Natural Selection. And again, let's be neat this time. Let's be neat this week, neat and complete sentences, and doing our best on these notes. Okay, so one thing we want to think about is the diversity of life on Earth. Okay, look at all the different types of animals, from vertebrates to arthropods and worms and insects, and amphibians, reptiles. You can see we have so much diversity of life, but all of these we know came from common ancestors. They came from the first life billions of years ago. So how did they change? How did we get so much diversity? Think about something like a frog. Look at these different types of frogs. They come in such different colors and shapes and sizes, and they live in such different environments. So how did these ancient amphibians change and develop into all these different types of amphibians that we see today? Okay, that's something we can talk about in this unit. Same thing would go with bird beaks. Look at all these different birds and their different beaks. Each beak has a different job. They eat a different type of food, or they use that beak for different purposes. But we know they came from common ancestors. They came from some birds that lived millions of years ago. So how did they change into such diversity? And so we're going to talk about evolution, natural selection, heredity and inheritance, and mutations. All of these go together to help us to explain how this happens. Okay, and again, this is really big, important ideas for science. Okay, these are some of the top important ideas that we've achieved and we've understood over the past 150 years. Okay, so evolution and natural selection, coming from Charles Darwin. This is really big. Okay, so remember, evolution is a new term, and it just means change over time. Okay, evolution means to change. And we know that animals have evolved. They've gone through evolution because we can look at examples like a horse. Ancient horses were smaller, and they've evolved to become bigger into our modern horse. And we can look at fossils and see this. Likewise, we know that whales, dolphins, porpoises, things like that, they came from land mammals that went into the ocean and evolved and changed. And again, we can look at the fossils and other evidence to prove that to ourselves. And let's look at birds. We have flightless birds. You know, they have wings, but they don't fly anymore. They use their wings for much different purposes. So why did they evolve wings if they didn't fly at one time, right? So we know that they used to fly, but they've changed. Okay, they've evolved. All right. Now, natural selection is another new term, and that just means survival of the fittest. Okay, it means that nature selects the best organisms to survive. Okay, because remember, life is a competition for food and water and shelter. So all these organisms are fighting for these things. Okay, predator is trying to get prey. Prey is trying to outrun and escape. Okay, animals are fighting over food. Even animals of the same family are fighting and are trying to get food. Like you see here, these birds, these baby birds want to be the loudest, and they want to get that parent bird to give them the food so that they can be strong and survive. And so if you survive, you win the game of life, right? And if you survive, if you get your food and your water and your shelter, you will reproduce. And when an organism reproduces, it survives. It continues on. But if not, if you lose the game, you go extinct. Okay. So for your notes, write down evolution and natural selection on your left-hand column, and write down a short definition in your own words about what these mean, okay? You can pause the video or keep going at this point. Okay, so let's talk about mutations too. We know that mutations are changes in DNA, and some mutations may help you. They may hurt an organism. Maybe they have no effect. But the best mutations survive, okay? The best mutations survive. So what's that mean? It means if you're an organism, if you're an animal or a plant, you have to ask yourself, do your mutations make you faster, stronger, smarter, sneakier, bigger, or smaller, slower, weaker? So mutations may be making an organism better or worse. And if they help an organism survive and reproduce and they make new offspring, this is called evolution. So it's based on mutations, all right? A cactus has had many mutations over millions of years to get these sharp needles, right? A cheetah has evolved to become very fast because it had the best mutations that allowed it to develop fast muscles and a body form and characteristics that allowed it to run fast. Spiders evolved these abilities to spin webs and capture prey. Okay, again, these were from mutations. This giant sequoia redwood tree, again, mutations to allow it to grow so big. The flying squirrel allows it to glide from treetop to treetop. Again, these are mutations. This insect looks like a leaf. Okay, again, had the best mutations for camouflage. This frog had mutations for poison, right? These are poison arrow frogs. A shark has had many, many mutations to give it the sharpest teeth. And again, these animals did not get to choose. They are just born with the best mutations. Let's talk about giraffes. It's a common example that we use in class. All right, so giraffes change over time. We know that they've evolved longer necks, right? That's what they're noted for. But did they choose to have a longer neck? Does a giraffe get to choose to grow its neck longer? No. It's born that way. It's born with the DNA that it has, and that determines what kind of a neck it has. So let's think of millions of years ago in Africa. There are different giraffes. And there's many mutations. Some have long necks, some have medium, and some have short necks, okay? They're just born that way. There's just a variety of giraffes. Well, what happens? Well, the short-necked giraffes, they're not going to survive because they're competing for food high up in the trees, and they just don't make it, okay? So the better mutations survive. The survivors get food, and they're going to reproduce, and that is natural selection, survival of the fittest. Nature picked that in this case, it's better to have long necks. Okay, so the longer neck giraffes will reproduce, and their offspring will have longer necks. And if we go on and they reproduce, they're going to have even longer necks. Okay, so we're going to get more mutations and probably more giraffes that have longer necks. Okay, just more and more mutations. All right, so if we now think about multiplying that over millions of years. Over millions of years, you're going to have more mutations, and you're going to have giraffes that get slowly longer necks. Okay, over millions and millions of years, you're going to have all kinds of mutations, and luckily, some giraffes are going to be born with longer necks. But you're still going to get some mutations where there's some giraffes with shorter necks, maybe some medium size. What's going to happen to them? They're not going to survive. They're just not going to get that food. They were unlucky. They were born with bad mutations, right? It's not their fault. They didn't choose that. That's just the way it goes. So unfortunately, they're probably not going to survive. They're not going to reproduce. And so the best mutations win. In this case, longer neck. All right. So that's a classic example. We'll talk more about that in class. All right. So on your notes, you have evolution, natural selection. I also want you to write a note, write down some information for mutations. And I want you to write down or draw a picture of our giraffe example. Okay, draw a diagram or a model showing this explanation for how giraffes got longer necks. And then write down a couple notes for that, okay? So spend a few minutes making some good notes about the giraffe example, and we'll talk more about it in class. All right, good job. Evolution and Natural Selection Part 1. This is Chapter 10, so you can also take a look at Chapter 10 and get a head start on everybody else as well. and I'll see you soon. See you in class. Bye. Ostrich and penguins, they have flowers. So there's many mutations. There's some long neck, medium, and short neck giraffes.